Hi there, you're very welcome to this 8th episode in our ongoing series on what it means to know God. And in this episode, we've kind of reached the epicenter of understanding God's character, His goodness, His mercy, His grace, and His love. And these elements flow from His character and show to us the kind of God that He is, the kind of God that wants to make and to have relationship with His people, His children, and that's us, that's me and you today. 2 episodes ago, in episode 6, we saw how Nicodemus asked that question of Jesus when he went to him in the dead of night, asking the question, Jesus, what does it mean to be saved? What does it mean to know God? That's the question he was really asking. Jesus replied to him and said to him, you must be born again. You must be born again. Well, how can that happen if we don't understand who God is? And the 4 attributes of goodness, mercy, grace and love are the key to understanding who God is. His goodness. The example in John chapter 10 verse 11 where Jesus describes himself as the good shepherd caring for his flock. His mercy, the mercy of God, we read about in Psalm 109 verse 21. But you, O sovereign Lord, deal well with me for your name's sake, and the goodness of your love delivers me. So he's a merciful and a gracious God. The grace of God, which is summed up in the cross, which we read about in Ephesians chapter 2 verse 5. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And that's exactly what Jesus was talking to Nicodemus about back in chapter 3 of John. But ultimately they culminate in love. And 1 John chapter 4 verse 7 to 19 is the epicenter of what it means to know God and to know His great love for us, expressed to us through His Son Jesus. You see, this culmination of His love leads to redemption and salvation in God through Christ. That's the ultimate objective. And this outpouring of love, this outpouring of compassion and mercy and goodness and grace on people's lives can be described to us in a story that I was actually sharing with my daughter Lydia. We were given a book by a good friend of ours on the story of the missionary Gladys Allwood, and it's called Are You Going to Stop? Are You Going to Stop? And Gladys Allwood certainly didn't stop, did she? She carried on in the face of immense struggle and persecution in the late 1930s in China. During that time, during the Second Sino-Japanese War, Gladys was protecting many orphans in the Chinese city of Yangcheng. The Japanese invaded in 1938. Yangcheng was being bombed and became temporarily occupied by the Japanese forces. But Gladys refused to leave the area and instead acted as a spy for her adopted country. She passed on Japanese troop movements and manoeuvres to the Chinese army, and she also brought food to Chinese villagers. When the Japanese learned of her activities, they offered a $100 reward for information leading to her capture, dead or alive. To protect the orphans in her care, Allwood decided it was time to flee the area. Started off on a journey of more than 240 miles towards Sian, which involved a crossing of the Yellow River. Now, back in those days, there were no lorries or carts to carry the children or these orphans across the mountains, so they had to walk through very demanding countryside, dodging Japanese troops as they went. Although she was wounded because of the Japanese soldiers and she contracted typhus fever on the journey, after many days Gladys and the children reached the Yellow River. But there was no bridge to be seen, there was no boats to cross this big river. And Gladys was stuck. How were they going to get across? The Japanese troops weren't far away and their lives were in great danger. But then a little boy piped up and said, why don't we cross it like Moses crossed the Red Sea? Because I'm not Moses, Gladys grumbled. But God's still God, the little boy replied. And that was true, because at that moment, round the corner, came this Chinese escort vessel down the river. And the troops on board the vessel carried them all to safety across the Yellow River and into the harbour at Xi'an, there in central China. Gladys didn't give up. It was said of her, are you going to stop? She didn't, because she loved those kids. She loved those orphans. She would have laid down her life for those orphans. And that's exactly what Jesus did for us on the cross. Because ultimately, He was the vessel which God sent to us to save us, to rescue us. It was an outpouring of the Father's love for his children, for us. We read about that, don't we, in this passage of 1 John chapter 4, verse 7 to 19. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love, and this is how God showed his love among us, that he sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us and his love is made complete in us. So you see, we need to trust God. We need to come to God today and say, Lord, I need you. I need to understand your love. I need to embrace it. And I want your love to change my life. And that way we can know God. Thanks for listening. Until next time. Bye-bye.